Quadratic formula is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and then this entire thing is over 2a, right? So it's important that you identify your a, b, and c properly. So for 21, I'll write a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 4, and c is equal to positive 3, right? Make sure the appropriate signs are there, otherwise you'll get the problem wrong. So I'll do this on the bottom here so that there's enough space. So negative b, right? So x is equal to negative b. So that's why it's negative 4 plus or minus the square root of b in parentheses because it's a negative minus 4 times a times c over 2a, right? Okay, so let's simplify this a bit. We get 4 plus or minus, and then under the radical, you get negative 4 squared is 16 minus 12. So 16 minus 12 is 4. So 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 over 2, that's what? 4 plus or minus 2 over 2. So now the radical simplified into an integer, we can do our two answers. We could do 4 plus 2 over 2, right? Which is 6 over 2, or 3. And then we have 4 minus 2 over 2, which is 2 over 2 equals 1. So we have two solutions here. We have x is equal to 3 or x is equal to 1. So that was 21. Okay, let's do 22. All right, 22. What's our a? A is 1. B is negative 7. And c is 3. So let's substitute. We got x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b, right, in parentheses is because it's negative, minus 4ac over 2a. So let's work through this. We got positive 7 plus or minus the square root of, this is what, 49 minus 12. And we get radical, oh sorry, I forgot over 2. So this is 7 plus or minus, what is this, 37. Radical 37 is not a perfect square. You can't simplify that. So this is actually our final answer. So x is equal to plus or minus radical 7 over 2. So we have x is equal to, just so that you remember, these are two answers, right? I know sometimes people forget because of the plus or minus symbol, right? So you could either write it two separate answers like this, or using the plus or minus symbol. All right, well, let me go to the left here for more space to do number 23. Number 23. I'll write down the equation. P squared minus 8p plus 16 is equal to 0. And remember, all quadratic formula problems, right? You have to first write it in terms of the standard form. Ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0 before you can do it, right? If it's not equal to 0, you have to set it equal to 0 first. All right, so I have a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 8, c is equal to 16. So I plug it into the quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So I have positive 8 plus or minus the square root of, I see that 8 squared is 64 and minus 4 times 16. That is also 64 over 2. So 64 minus 64 is 0, right? Square root of 0 is 0. So you're doing 8 plus or minus 0 over 2. So if you recall on Monday's class, when the square root simplifies to a 0, that means you have one solution, because when you add or subtract 0, it doesn't change your answer. So 8 over 2 is equal to 4. So x equals 4 is, if you remember, is called a double root or a repeated root. Okay, so x equals 4, x equals 4. Those are the two solutions. All right, number 24. Let me see what the problem was. 24. Let's do that in orange. So number 24, we have u squared plus 7u minus 30 is equal to 0. So it's already equal to 0. I can identify a is 1, b is 7, and c is negative 30. Right? So x is equal to negative b plus or minus. You notice b was positive, so we didn't need to do negative, negative, right? The square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So I have negative 7 plus or minus the square root of, this is 49, 7 squared is 49. So negative and negative, so I have plus 120, right, over 2. So I see that this adds up to 169. So negative 7 plus or minus radical 169 over 2. This is a perfect square, which is what? 13, right? Negative 7 plus or minus 13 over 2. So I have two solutions to worry about. Negative 7 plus 13 over 2 and negative 7 minus 13 over 2. So the first one, that's your 6 over 2 is equal to 3. The second solution is negative 20 over 2, which is negative 10. So we have x is equal to 3, or x is equal to negative 10. And those were all the problems in the first page, or I mean the third page, sorry. Any questions before we move on? Okay. Let me do 25 and 27 on this page, and then I'll move to the right side and do the 26 and 28. All right, so 25, I have a is equal to negative 1, b is equal to 3, and c is equal to 5. So x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I have negative 3 plus or minus 3 squared is 9. This is what? Plus 20 over negative 2. Okay, so I have negative 3 plus or minus square root of 29 over negative 2. Now, I don't know if you remember, a couple of chapters back, we talked about negatives in the denominator. That's not a conventional way to write it, right? So we have to take the negative away from the denominator and distribute it to the numerator. So if you do that, this negative goes up to the numerator, right? So this negative 3 becomes a positive 3, right? Let me write it over here. 3 over 2, like this, right? Now this plus or minus radical 29. The positive would become a negative, and this negative would become a positive. So this plus or minus doesn't really change at all. So we have x is equal to 3 plus or minus radical 29 over 2. Did that part make sense for everyone? I hope it did. Alright, well, number 27, a is equal to negative 3, b is equal to 2, and c is equal to negative 1. So this is going to be a fun problem because it's a complex number problem here. Alright, so x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Okay, so we have negative 2 plus or minus 2 squared is 4, minus 4 times negative 3 times negative 1. That's still negative 12 over negative 6. Excuse me. Now we have negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 minus 8 is negative 8 over negative 6. So as you can see, we have to simplify this radical negative 8, right? And if you recall, square root of negative 8 is equal to the square root of 8 times the square root of negative 1, right? Or I should simplify further, radical 4, radical 2, and your I, right? So this is 2I radical 2. Okay, so now negative 2 plus or minus 2I radical 2 over negative 6. I see that this can be simplified further. There's a common factor of a 2, right? So let's factor out a 2. In fact, because the denominator is a negative, if I factor out a negative 2, that'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I can just get rid of the negative in the denominator that way as well. So let's do negative 2, and then we get positive 1 plus or minus I radical 2 over negative 6. So these cancel out. This becomes a 1, and this becomes a 3. So my final answer will be x is equal to 1 plus or minus I root 2 over 3. Right? You see how that negative in the numerator and negative in the denominator cancel out? Which is why I factored out a negative in the numerator. Okay. Last two. We have over here, let me do orange, 26. A is equal to 2, B is equal to negative 3, C is equal to negative 7. And let me write 28 on the right side before I forget. 5t squared minus 2t minus 2 is equal to 0. Okay, so back to 26. So we know x is equal to negative b in parentheses, right? Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So this is positive 3 plus or minus the square root of, so negative 3 squared is 9, and we have, this is plus, right? Plus 8 times 7 is 56 over 4. So now this simplifies to 3 plus or minus, this is 65 over 4. So Radical 65, I don't see any perfect squares in there. Even if I divide by 5, there's nothing there. So that's the final answer. X is equal to 3 plus or minus radical 65 over 4. There's no common factor to factor out and cancel out. So that's it. And 28. A is equal to 5, B is equal to negative 2, and C is equal to negative 2 as well. So X is equal to negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC over 2A. So we have positive 2 plus or minus the square root of 4, and this is plus, right? 4 times 5 is 20, times 2 is 40 over 10. So 2 plus or minus square root of 44 over 10. And I see there's a 4 here, 4 times 11, right? Radical 44 is equal to radical 4 times 11, so that's 2 radical 11. So I'm going to simplify this to 2 plus or minus 2 radical 11 over 10. I hope you see the 2 is a common factor. We factor that out. We get 1 plus or minus radical 11 over 10. So the 2 cancels out with the 10, and you get 5 remaining, right? So the final answer is 1 plus or minus radical 11 over 5. Okay, so these are the problems that we missed yesterday. So hopefully as you watch this video, you'll be able to do the problems on the homework tonight.